incident was about to take place that would shake the foundations of the civilized world.
It is time to open your mind. Time to discover your divine self as we navigate this holographic matrix together. Strap in, Cosmic Family, as we slide through this wormhole of cosmic information together in search of the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
It's time to go inside the Matrix.
Inside the Matrix.
With your host, Jimmy Brent.
All right, welcome to Inside the Matrix today. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. We have an amazing guest for this first hour today, and we're so happy to have G. Edward Griffin with us. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. He's a writer, documentary film producer, and founder of Freedom Force International. Listed in Who's Who in America, he is well known because of his talent for researching difficult topics and presenting them in clear terms that all can understand. He has dealt with such diverse topics as archaeology and ancient Earth history, the Federal Reserve System, and international banking, terrorism, internal subversion, the history of taxation, the U.S. foreign policy, the science and politics of cancer therapy, the Supreme Court, and the United Nations. His better-known works include The Creature from Jekyll Island, World Without Cancer, The Discovery of Noah's Ark, Moles in High Places, The Open Gates of Troy, No Place to Hide, The Capitalist Conspiracy, More Deadly Than War, The Grand Design, The Great Prison Break, and The Fearful Master. Edward is a graduate of the University of Michigan, where he majored in speech and communications. He is a recipient of the coveted Telly Award for Excellence in Television Production, the creator of the Reality Zone audio archives, publisher of Need to Know News, and is president of American Media, a publishing and video production company in Southern California. He has served on the board of directors of the National Health Federation and the International Association of Cancer Victors and Friends, and is founder and president of the Cancer Cure Foundation. He is the founder of Freedom Force International and creator of Red Pill University, Red Pill Expos, and Rabbit Hole Expeditions. The mission of these Red Pill and Rabbit Hole endeavors is far more serious than they may sound. It is to popularize a global coalition for the victory of individualism over collectivism and liberty over tyranny. Ed, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. That's quite a lengthy introduction, and I was thinking about, gosh, did I do all of those things? And I guess that's what happens when you live long enough, you know.
Yes, you did, and I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with your work, and you're so highly respected and revered in our world and in the world of people who seek truth and understanding of what's really going on. To get started, though, would you please kind of give us a broad brush of your history, how you kind of got into your writing career and your presenting career, and a lot of your beliefs that you've come up with based on your research?
Oh, sure, I can do that. That's probably not of much interest to very many people. I mean, after all, I'm just another person that happened to stumble into some important topics. Fortunately, I had the ability to communicate what I learned, and so that kind of put me in the spotlight. But I'm just like, the average bloke, as they say, across the pond. When I came out of school, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that the entertainment industry was probably beckoning me, and I worked my way through the university as a radio announcer at WUOM, and then when I got out, I got a job at the Detroit television station WWJ.
I remember it.
Yeah, it was one of the first really large, what we used to think of as modern television stations. Actually had studios. It was built to be a television studio. Most of them were converted radio studios and things like that. So I got into that, went in the military, came out to California, where I thought I was going to break into Hollywood. They were surely just waiting for me to show up. And that's when I began to realize I guess I took the first red pill. I realized what life was really about. I discovered that there was a lot of talent out in Hollywood that was a lot better than mine. And these kids were out there waiting table and bussing dishes and washing cars, waiting for their big chance in Hollywood, And by this time, I had a wife and 1.5 children, one already here, half on the way. And I thought, golly, I've got to get a job. I've got to job, that horrible word.
Yeah.
And I have to support my gulp family. Never thought of having a family. Young men never do that until they have families, of course.
Right.
I think women are smarter. That's something, I suppose, genetic kicks in, and they're thinking about families long before young men ever know what the word means, probably. But anyway, so that's what happened to me, and I discovered I had to support a family. So I got a job with a large insurance company. It was doing very well. I was climbing the corporate ladder. I decided I wanted to, if I'm going to do the corporate thing, I'm going to do it right. So I picked a company where all the top management was pretty old, and I noticed that the middle management was a lot of old codgers there too. So those at the lower levels of management, if they did well, it wouldn't be long before there'd be a lot of vacancies up above, and they'd have to fill them. So I thought, okay, this is my spot, and I enjoyed my work. It was good work. We were doing respectable things. We were creating insurance platforms for corporations that wanted to insure their employees in health insurance and life insurance, all that sort of thing. And I was on my track. And then I discovered the real world. I picked up a magazine or a little brochure. It was a critique of the United Nations. Now, mind you, this was back in the late 1950s. It was back 1959, I think, that I stumbled across that little pamphlet. And it was criticizing the UN. Well, that was forbidden because I just came out of the university, right? And
sure.
I had been taught that the United Nations was our last best hope for peace, and that there was nothing bad about the UN. It was where people came together from all nations, and we talked out our differences around a table instead of on the battlefield. And we brought about peace and brotherhood and prosperity. So who would dare criticize the UN? So that was my first jolt. I rejected it soundly. But then another interesting thing happened. I went to the library. Well, when I got out of school, I thought I would never go back into a library again because I always viewed libraries as places where they punish students, for being students.
Sure.
And I thought, well, I didn't enjoy any of the books they gave me to read. So anyway, make a long story short, I'm trying to make this a little bit frivolous perhaps, but that's really what happened. I went to the library. I wanted to go to this international department and see if I could see something really in-depth about the UN, because I had to admit that I really didn't know much about it. I just heard about it. And so I went there, and I noticed that all the books were written by fans of the UN. They were either people who were currently employed at the UN, or their nest was feathered somewhat by the success of the UN. There were a lot of people, I discovered, that really had their livelihoods and their political and economic careers that were really dependent on the growth of the power and the financing net of the United Nations. I thought that was kind of strange, but anyway, I got the books and I started to read them, and I could tell right away that this was propaganda. At least I knew enough because I had done some writing and I knew how to, well, we call it propaganda. We think of propaganda as being bad. It doesn't have to be bad. I mean, if propaganda merely means presenting your point of view in the most positive light possible. Right. And it can be done for good or for evil. If you're trying to convince a kid to eat his spinach, for example, you can, say, look at Popeye, he's strong, he eats his spinach. Well, that's propaganda. But at least, the kid eats his spinach. Doesn't make him strong, but he gets the spinach down anyway. But I recognized that this was all propaganda. There was no other side. So that's when I went back to this pamphlet and read it carefully, and there were a couple of references, and I dug those out. And the first thing you know, I was on a research path that led me to one door after another began to open. I discovered that there were things beyond those doors that we had never been told about, and that they were real. It wasn't they were real, and it wasn't just some, what we now call conspiracy theorist or some crackpot writing about these things. These were essays and books written by people who were there, who actually in most cases were on the other side, and they became whistleblowers and things like that. Well, I'm taking too long on this, but you asked for it, so here it is. It's
We wanted to hear it.
all right. Well, anyway, I discovered something at this point that I didn't know about myself. I discovered that I had a crusader gene. I had it just kicked in. It started to vibrate, and I found that I was driven out of my indignation of what I was learning. I was driven to this most amazing idea that I had to do something about it. I mean, I had to do something about it. I felt this responsibility. I had to do something about it. I couldn't just go, oh, isn't this terrible? Isn't this, gee, I wonder what's going to happen next. No, that wasn't even possible. I had to do something about it. So what I did, first of all, is quit my job. My poor wife almost had a fit.
I'm sure she didn't like that too much.
Oh, she did. She understands it now. But at the time, this was awful, What are we going to do? And so forth. Well, I quit my job because I wanted to get really into total mode, communicating the things that I had learned. I was delivering speeches, speak before any group that would have me. I didn't charge anything, but free speeches. So there were a lot of little groups around, like Kiwanis clubs and things like that, and PTAs even. They wanted this free speaker, and I was available. So I was giving a lot of speeches. And then I decided I would produce some film strips, we called them. They're kind of the precursors of what we now call documentaries, a series of slide lectures, basically, like a PowerPoint in those days.
Right.
Where the slides had to be projected up on the screen, one slide at a time with big carousel slide containers, or actually on film strips. Anyway, that's a technical thing. So the beep would come along, and then we'd advance the picture, and the soundtrack would go on. So that's what we did. I was producing a whole bunch of those on various things. And I got the idea that I was going to do one on inflation. Never did do that, but I started the research, and that led me to the Federal Reserve. Well, that was a door, a huge door. And once I got past that one, that was really the grand opening to see the common thread to almost all of the problems that I was discovering. The common thread, of course, is money, because everything has to be funded. Money is like the arterial system in the body. Everything in the body is connected to all other parts of the body through the arterial system and the neural system too. But without the blood flow, nothing happens. And so I discovered that the blood flow in all of these issues that I was very unhappy about was the flow of money. It was driven by money. And the question came up early in my awareness of this is, well, where does this money come from? And I discovered, well, it comes from the people, of course. It used to come in the form of taxes. But then I discovered that, a couple of centuries ago, they invented a hidden tax, a tax against which people would not and could not rebel. Prior to that time, every time a nation found that it was being taxed at the 40% level or near that, there was a tax rebellion. And the king would be deposed or lose his head, or another king would come in. And the tax reform was always an effective way of overthrowing systems. But after the invention of this silent taxation or invisible taxation called inflation, and they do this through the mechanism called a central bank mechanism, which our Federal Reserve System is. Once I got that picture, all of a sudden, all of these little jigsaw pieces of the puzzle moved together, and it went snap, and there was the whole picture in front of me. Now I was really off on my crusading horse and tilting windmills and all the rest. So that's basically it. It's just one little step after the other to the point where my life changed. I found out that I was not the person I thought I was until I had my family. That was the first big move. And then I discovered I had a feeling of responsibility to the world, and it sounds silly, but I did, and I still do. I have a responsibility to my family, my community, my country, and literally to the whole world.
Doesn't sound silly at all to me, and I fully concur, and I think a lot of us kind of have that feeling that we have a responsibility. Those of us who can actually see what's really going on and have done the research, we realize that we're in big trouble, and we've got a lot of, terrible systems that have enslaved us in this country. And you mentioned inflation, and anybody that looks into it, 100 years ago, a man could save money for a couple of years and build his home and have it completely paid for because a dollar went a lot further. Now, a dollar is worth about 3 or 4 cents from what I'm seeing of what it was worth 100 years ago, before the Federal Reserve kicked in. And a lot of people don't understand that the Federal Reserve is a private consortium. It is, somewhat embedded with government as far as being sort of partners, but it is a private corporation, as is the IRS. And Henry Ford has that famous quote. I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something to the effect that if the American people ever actually understood their own money system, there'd be a revolution overnight, because these people literally have the money machine to create free money out of thin air, and then have the gall to charge us interest on top of that. So your book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which it's an incredible book, and I recommend it to anybody out there who, I'm sure it's available on Amazon and other places, anybody who really wants to understand the origins and how these people plotted to take over our money system and eventually pretty much the world with this system. You'll learn, how it was done. So, it's an insidious thing, and knowledge is still. A lot of people don't understand, what we're up against here.
Well, that's right, and even those of us who have spent our lifetime studying it, almost every week at least, I discovered something profound that I didn't know about the very system that I consider myself to be well informed in. I find that there are little nooks and crannies and the depth of corruption that I just couldn't believe existed. But it's I guess it's the fact that this thing has grown. This thing, I call it the creature from Jekyll Island, the Federal Reserve. It continues to grow. It isn't now what it was when it was created, and. You mentioned just a moment ago that it's hard for people to believe that we have a system in place. You call it I think you said a consortium, which is an excellent word for it. I call it a cartel, which is also an excellent word for it because it's both of those. But in my mind, it's just a cartel, no different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel. Happens to be a banking cartel. And you said it's hard for people to believe that our money is created by a banking cartel instead of by the United States government. And it is hard to believe. And in fact, it was even hard for the creators of the Federal Reserve System to believe. And that was one of the ironic things that I discovered as I got really into this, is that the bankers themselves, when they were promoting the Federal Reserve Act, were simply looking for a way to control their own industry, to set the rules and regulations so that they would favor them and they wouldn't be interfered with by Congress. They knew that there was going to be some kind of a bill passed to regulate the banking industry. So they wisely decided they weren't going to sit around and just wait and see what came down the pike. They decided to get in front of the parade, and they pretended to be their own opposition. And they wrote their own banking bill, supposedly, to control and get rid of all those big bad bankers. They wrote it themselves, which is why the meeting was held in secret on Jekyll Island instead of in Washington, D.C. But what they did not anticipate was that it would be so easy to get the government to agree not only to have them set their own rules and regulations, but to actually create the nation's money supply. I mean, that is a constitutional prerogative that's given to the government. And that the congressmen were so happy to give away everything, give away the farm. They went right along with it and said, oh, yeah, we not only give you the right to make your own rules, but here's our money supply. You create it.
Unbelievable.
And they were stunned. They were stunned. It was like something put in. They put it into the bill more or less as a compromising point to say, okay, all right, we yield on this point, we yield on that point, and so forth. What they really wanted was a lot less than what they started with, but they got almost everything they started with. Anyway, that's what you get when you read history. You discover history is more interesting and unbelievable, really, than the most wild fiction stories.
Absolutely, and of course, history. The history that we get taught in schools has been whitewashed and rewritten and edited for the purposes of making the writers and the participants look more honorable in some way. But This really is an insidious system, and Woodrow Wilson, even himself, who was, largely responsible for allowing this to happen as president of the United States, he wrote later that he was, regretful, or maybe he wrote it to sort of give himself some guilt relief. I'm not sure, but he said that he realized he ruined his country because he gave away the power to create money to a bunch of private bankers. I mean, it's mind-boggling, really.
Well, it is mind-boggling. And, of course, Woodrow Wilson is a special case study in himself. I think the last part of his career, not much is said about this in the history books, but it's pretty clear that he was pretty much out of his mind. He was being dominated by his wife, and she was really running things. And in the political side, he was being dominated by Edward Mandell House,
right,
who had moved actually his offices into the White House. And everything Wilson did politically it came from the fertile mind of Edward Mandell House. So what Wilson says at one point in his career completely contradicts what he says in another point of his career. And you wonder if he's really writing this stuff, or if he is writing this stuff, has he lost his memory? Or if he's lost his memory, if he hasn't has he lost his whole mind, And
yeah.
But I do know that there are certain things that are very clear. And that is that he was the candidate chosen by the bankers. They funded him. They chose him. They put him on the ticket. They had the power to make him a candidate. And he wasn't particularly a good candidate, but with all this money and power behind him, and the strategies of selling the idea of the Federal Reserve System as being a means of controlling the big bad banks, with all that momentum, Wilson was brought into the White House as their guy. But part of the deal was he had to speak against them. And so that's what you see. You see Woodrow Wilson cooperating with them in every way, doing exactly what they want, hobnobbing with them, accepting their money, traveling with them, appearing on stage with them. They're his tribe. And yet he's giving speeches saying, we got to look out for this Federal Reserve. I mean, they didn't call it the Federal Reserve. They called it the banking, what do they have a special name? Slips my mind right now, but it was, the money trust. The money trust was the slogan they used. We've got to break the grip of the money trust. And that's how he won the election. All the while, he was the man of the money trust. And that we know he was aware of everything he was doing. So once you establish the ability for a person like that to be totally dishonest, you can't really believe anything they say.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And we've seen that play out over and over again with presidents, with other politicians that are bought and paid for by a lot of these same special interests. It's like George Carlin says, it's a small club, and we're not in it.
Yeah, we're not in it, for sure.
I always say we have the best money the best government that money can buy. Anyway, we're coming up against the break. Our guest is G. Edward Griffin, and we're so happy he's here. We're going to take a short pause right now, and we'll be back in just a few.
Your ambassador to the unknown and host of Inside the Matrix, Jimmy Brent.
Okay, welcome back to our second segment here with our special guest, G. Edward Griffin. And before we get too much further, Ed, I'd like to remind people that the Red Pill Expo is coming up November 8th and 9th in Mesquite, Nevada, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump north of Las Vegas. So for all of our Las Vegas people and anybody else who is interested, it's going to be a great event. Edward is going to be speaking there. Del Bigtrees of the Vax movie will be speaking there. Ed, you want to expand on that and tell us about it?
Yeah, I can hardly wait to do that, actually, because I was sitting there during the break thinking, what a coincidence it is that here we have the Red Pill Expo, and it's being held right in the backyard of where you folks are located, and you're all about the red pill and the matrix and everything. And it occurred to me that we better go out and rent a huge circus tent, because all of your listeners are definitely going to want to come out to Mesquite
That's right.
And hobnob and discover who you all are, and exchange cards and so forth. And I was just getting all excited dreaming about that. But so anyway, your audience knows what the red pill is about, but for those few people that may not, it goes back to the very popular sci-fi movie called The Matrix, in which all humankind was living in a dream world that was forced upon them by this computerized system, and they were living in an illusion, and the whole object of the movie was for a few awakened humans to rescue the rest of mankind and get them out of the matrix so they can see life the way it really is and shed off all these illusions. Well, some of us have been trying to get people to break through the illusions for a long, long time. And so I got to thinking a few years ago that would be a nice meme to use to popularize what we're trying to do. Yes. And so we gave it a try. We thought we'd have our first Red Pill Expo back in 2017, which we did in a place called Bozeman, Montana. And we thought, oh, well, that's out of the way. Nobody wants to come to Bozeman. But some people said, no, they always wanted to go to Montana and had to have an excuse to look at the national parks there and so forth. So we did it there, and blow me down, the place was packed. We never dreamed we'd fill up that place. They came from all over the world, all different countries to attend the Red Pill Expo. So we knew we had captured the right theme. And basically, we've had this will be our fourth one now, and we intend to have 2 of them every year. And if we can get enough momentum, we'll probably have several of them going on at the same time in different parts of the United States and certainly in different parts of the world. Because what we're talking about is a global problem. Yes. I don't think the United States is going to pull out of this unless the whole world pulls out of it, because our forces that we're facing are international in scope. And the only way we can defeat those forces is with an international counterforce. So the whole purpose of the Red Pill Expo, well, the 2 purposes. One is to bring people together who suspect that something is wrong. Everybody knows that something is wrong, but they're not quite sure what it is. And here's a chance for them to evaluate the red pills that have been taken by all of these powerful speakers that we'll talk about in a moment. People in their professional and personal lives who've taken the red pill on something, and they want to share it with others. So it's a chance to come and see what others are saying from their personal perspective. And then it's a chance to meet each other. And finally, it's a chance to get organized and to form together if you wish. And if you've got that crusader gene that we were talking about and you want to do something about it and you want to change the world, well, then this is where you find your partners, because you can't do it alone. But if you join together with others, the momentum is incredible. I've discovered this years ago that, 2 people working separately have the force and effect of 2 people. But if you have those 2 people work together and organize and share responsibilities and efforts, they multiply. 2 people can accomplish the effect of 4. And if 3 people work together, they do the work of 9. And 4 can equal 16, and so forth. And so that once you get to the power, you've got 100 people or a couple of 100 people doing that. The power of that kind of unity and coordination is absolutely incredible. And that's the kind of power we need to actually bring about change in society. So way down at the end of this reasoning, we thought this is a chance for people like us to discover, first of all, that we're not alone, that actually the world is full of us. We just don't know that there are others out there like us. And the media certainly doesn't tell us that. And it's a chance for those of us who want to get together and form into a coalition, maybe we just might be able to bring about change. Well, the first step in all of that is to put on the expo, and that's to bring people together. And so we have to have some very, interesting and worthwhile presenters there. And so I'm urging everybody who's listening to this to go on their computer and look up redpillexpo.org. redpillexpo.org. And you'll see right there on the front page the pictures of the speakers who are going to be at this presentation in Mesquite, right around your backyard there, on November 8th and 9th, coming right up.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that you're going to be doing a bunch more, because this needs to happen. And when people go to redpillexpo.org, like Ed just said, you will notice some amazing speakers besides Ed. He's going to be our keynote, I'm sure. But there's some great people going to be speaking there. And I tell you, this does not happen very often in our neck of the woods. We have a lot of conferences in Vegas. It's one of the, biggest conference and expo places in the world, but it's rare when you have something like this. So I'm urging anybody who has an interest, please go check it out. And I think you'll be as excited as I am to attend this expo. And that's going to be really, really good to see a bunch of these events going on. And the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, Jimmy, if I have a moment, may I mention some of these speakers by name?
Yes, please.
Well, in addition to myself, of course, you've already got an idea what I'm all about because of what I've said. But I will be giving a presentation that I had put together about a year ago for a health conference. And the main theme of the health conference was the fact that most of the really effective natural treatments for various diseases are blocked by law because the pharmaceutical industry has tremendous clout, tremendous amount of money that they use to lobby Congress, and they get laws passed that make it illegal to use things from nature, for example. They call that quackery. And so that forces people to use only the things that come out of the test tubes from the pharmaceutical companies, which of course are very, very expensive, and the profit margins are huge. Meanwhile, if you want to eat something that comes off of a tree or out of the ground, and it can be shown that it's much more effective in the treatment of your condition than that stuff that comes out of a test tube, and it doesn't have any side effects to it, well, that's called, you're a quack, and that's illegal. And so that was the whole theme about this conference I was at, was the concern over the fact that the government itself was preventing people from being healthy. Yep. And so I designed a presentation, and I called it When Crooks Become Health Cops. And I was talking primarily about the FDA and the AMA and so forth. But I thought for this conference, I would polish that up a little bit and just talk about the larger picture. And so my topic is going to be When Crooks Become Cops. It's the same idea, So that's my topic. And then I see our friend Michael Rechtenwald, who is an author and former professor at New York University. And he has two presentations. His first one is Why I Am No Longer a Communist Professor.
How interesting.
He was a hammer and sickle guy. In fact, he described himself as to the left of Lenin. Okay?
Oh, no.
Yeah. And he was.
Is that possible?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And he was teaching students at New York University. Well, that's why all of our universities have guys like this.
Right.
And he saw the light. He took the red pill. He'll be talking about that. His second presentation is about transhumanism ahead. Very interesting guy. Then we've got Dr. Alan Keyes. He's a TV commentator. He's a former U.S. ambassador, a doctorate graduate of Harvard. He ran against Obama in 2004 in the Senate race. And he's a very well-known black fellow and well-spoken, well-educated, and he has the Crusader gene.
Oh, he's great.
And he's going to be talking about the political illusion of racism. Mm-hmm. Richard Ruling, an MD, had a fellowship in cardiology. He taught health science at Loma Linda University. His credentials are top of the craft. His topic is prescription drugs are today's number one cause of death.
Yep.
What a red pill that is, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, Ammon Bundy, he's the son of Cliven Bundy of the, 2014 Bundy standoff. You guys out there know all about that more than anybody else. And he will be speaking, and his topic is, we're from the government, and we're here to help you.
That's great.
Well, you get the idea. Okay? All right. Uh-huh. And we've got speaker.
And Sheriff Mack. Oh, I love that guy. He's a constitutionalist and so well informed.
Yeah, and he's going to be talking about civilian disarmament and the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. Oh, I have to tell you about at least one more. There's plenty more, by the way.
Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of them.
There's 16 of them up on the page, and some more besides that. But Ann Blake Tracy, you've got to hear this woman. She's an expert on homicidal and suicidal effects of SSRI drugs. And those are the antidepressant drugs that they have all the kids on.
Yep.
And her topic is antidepressant drugs, the hidden cause of mass shootings and suicides. Just think about that. We don't realize that all of these kids involved in mass shootings, all of them, well, I say all that we know about, maybe I'm going to say over 90% of them, we can prove that they were on these antidepressant drugs and they were out of their gourds when they did these mass shootings because of the drugs. Has nothing to do with guns, nothing to do with guns, has all to do with antidepressant drugs.
Yes.
Now, if that's not a red pill, I don't know what it is.
Absolutely. And, we've seen that, come out, and it's so important. People do not understand how dangerous these psychotropic drugs are, like Prozac, and that's probably one of the most well-known ones. But all of this class of drugs is totally insidious invention of the pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. But it also fits into what we call the deep state narrative, of course, they want to disarm the country. And what better way to do that than to, sensationalize these events when they happen. Although if you put it in, it's always horrible. And there's no doubt about it. And I don't mean to demean anybody who lost somebody in one of these events. But if you put it into perspective, it's like you said, the medical industry kills, dozens of times more people with their drugs than ever, get killed in shootings. But the shootings are much more sensational. And of course, we know we had a huge one here in Las Vegas, probably the biggest one ever. Mm-hmm. And, and a lot of these people, if they're not on these drugs, they're certainly programmed in some way or another. A lot of us are familiar with the MK Ultra and those types of programs. And people can be programmed just like computers to carry out these things. And a lot of them even have no recollection of what they've done because their psyches have been splintered into different alters or personalities, and one doesn't know about the other. So this has been proven that this can be done, the Manchurian Candidate type of thing. So, people need to understand stuff like that. And I'm really glad she's going to be talking about that. Yeah.
And especially when you combine that kind of programming, psychological programming, you combine that with these SSRI drugs, and you heighten their sensitivity to that kind of program by 100-fold. So it all works together. And it's time that people knew about this because, well, there are so many horrible things going on. And that's one of the dangers, because it makes it easy for those who don't want the world to know about what we're saying. It makes it easy for them to say, oh, these are just a bunch of fear mongers. And, they do, it begins to sound like they're right, because there is a lot to fear out there. Mm-hmm. And, but you don't overcome it by saying, okay, let's think positive and ignore these things, because they're really out to bite you in the fanny. I mean, if you ignore them, if you ignore that growling dog behind you, he's going to bite you in the fanny, probably, or on the leg. So ignoring these problems is not the most productive thing in the world. But anyway, I have to plead guilty. Sometimes it sounds like we're talking too much about problems. I wish there were some happy things, but what we want to do is build a world in which we don't have to worry about these kinds of tragedies anymore. And then we can get on with our lives. But we have a job to do first.
Yeah, and the vast majority of people out there are good people. They are good-hearted people, but they just are not informed. They just don't understand the system that's been imposed on us. And that's what we're up against is just an ignorance. I think once people are informed and they actually understand the systems, like the banking system and a lot of these political and school systems and religious systems, mm-hmm. They would definitely, stand up to it. But that's not encouraged. Independent thought is never encouraged. We have that Prussian school system, which just creates a bunch of really good, obedient workers in our society, and that's it.
Passive workers who do exactly what they're told. They're told that being a team player is better than being someone who rocks the boat and you shut up and sit down sort of thing. And they're making that into an American virtue, is the ability to shut up and sit down and go along. And that's not what built this country. It's what will destroy this country.
Absolutely. And the founding fathers were anything but that. These people were rebels. They risked their fortunes, and many of them lost their fortunes and their lives to stand up to, King George and the system of the time, which is very similar in a lot of ways to what we have now. But they were willing to stand up. They had the moral fortitude, and the desire for freedom was far greater than anything else. And when you read about the signing of the Declaration of Independence in the Federalist Papers, you realize the intelligence of these men and the fact that they were extremely motivated to do the right thing. And that's what we need to, see come forward again.
Yeah. I'm thinking we're talking right in the backyard of Mesquite. And if we don't do something to encourage everybody in the Las Vegas area and within 3 or 4 hours driving to get out there, I think we dropped the ball. So I'm thinking, what can I do? Here's something I can do. I'm in charge of this thing, so I can do whatever I want to, right?
That's right.
Well, not quite, because I got a team that I better do it right or I'll hear about it. But I'm thinking what I'd like to do is give you a code, a discount code. If anybody who hears this program, who wants to come to the event, if they will just, when they sign up, put in the code, what's your radio station's KCOR, right?
Yes.
KCOR. Just write in KCOR in the discount code. And when we're through, I'll go immediately to the program and make sure that discount will give a 10% discount on all of the general admission tickets, whether it's general admission or VIP. And now people will want to know what those costs are. Well, right now, the general admission for the 2 days, all these speakers, is $175. But after the end of the month, just a few days away, it'll go up to $195. So you could knock off, approximately $20 from that ticket if you use the KCOR coupon. Great.
Okay, listeners, you've got you've got a perk here. Yeah, that's wonderful. And this is going to be an exciting event, and I look forward to. I'm hoping that I'll get to speak to some of these people too, and hopefully have some of them on the show as well. And I will also be doing some interviews there. And I hope that you'll swing by and say hello to us while we're there too, Ed.
Oh, you can be sure. I'll be glad to do that. In fact, I will want to do that. So,
great.
Yeah.
So what we've got. We're up against, the deep state, the cabal, whatever you want to say. But the encouraging thing is, I know myself back in the 90s when Ed, you go further back than me, and you learned this stuff long before I did. But when I was learning these things in the 90s, I thought, we're just doomed. It's a done deal. There's no way we're going to have any chance against this system. But now there is an awakening going on. And because of the internet, because of social media, it's a double-edged sword. The bad guys want to collect all our information and use that to program against us and to stay ahead of any possible opposition. But we have it to share information. Things like this radio show, like the Red Pill Expo, and all the other channels that people are presenting this information. There is an awakening going on, and that's an exciting thing.
Yeah, definitely an awakening going on. And I would like to say that if people expect us to turn this around by the next election, they don't have the picture yet. This is going to take some time. It took our opponents over 100 years to corrupt the system and to turn it from the most freedom-embracing system the world had ever seen, not without its faults, to be sure. It wasn't perfect. It was a beta model, remember. But it turned the best system the world had yet ever seen into what is crumbling, and could well turn into the worst system if we don't do something about it. The worst system the world has ever seen. But it took them over 100 years to do it. They didn't invade with armies and bayonets and bombs. They took over from the inside. They infiltrated our political systems and our media and our school system and our tax-exempt foundations and government agencies and all that sort of thing. It was a slow process, and they did it according to a plan. Now we're on to them, and we're going to use the same plan to get them out of all of those institutions. They call them the power centers of society. And that doesn't happen overnight. Even if we had the best guy in the world to run for president, if he didn't have the support and understanding of the population behind him, all across the culture and across the economy, across the political system, it wouldn't work. So our job is huge, but it's easy in the sense that it's simple. All we have to do is get the word out and find people who are like listening to this program right now, who decide to do more than just say, "Isn't that terrible?" Who decide that why should they fight City Hall when they can be City Hall? We're looking for people who will get up off of their couches and say, "I'm going to run for office," or "I'm going to find somebody that would run for office who has no axe to grind except liberty." He's not out there to promote himself or to promote the interests of the corporations that are giving them $200,000 and $300,000 and $500,000 a year campaign donations. No, they have no axe to grind except to represent the people and preserve their liberties. That's what we're trying to build. It can be done. In fact, we're started. It's already moving. But my message is that it won't happen by next November, whenever that next November happens to be. Right. I think it's going to be about 2 generations. I'm not going to be around to see it, and maybe many of you listening will not, but some will be. That's not important.
Thank you so much. That was so well said. I want to thank you for being on the show. Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Right, I got it.
But I will see you in Mesquite on November 8th and 9th. And please, as many of you can out there, join us. We'll be happy to see you there. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with G. Edward Griffin. We'll see you at the Red Pill Expo. All right. Welcome to the second half of the show, Inside the Matrix. Today we have returning with us once again Robert Phoenix. He's been on the show before, and he's an amazing astrologer and researcher and just a super smart guy. So we like to check in with him and get his take on what's happening in the world. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, Jimmy. It's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Sure. And before the show started, we were briefly talking about the madness that's going on in the world right now, especially in the political world. We're just seeing people become unglued here. Could you kind of give us your take on some of that?
Yeah. So we're in a really interesting time just in terms of, vectors and momentum. I mean, everything that we're talking about now, or we'll talk about now, has its roots in what's been going on roughly for the last 3 to 4 years. Like, we didn't just get here, just show up here and wash upon this crazy shore of chaos. Right. There are things that have contributed to this moment in time. And if you go back and look at where we were in 2014, 2015, 2016, all the way up through now, the major aspect that was and still determines a lot to where we are today was a Uranus aspect, and Uranus was in the sign of Aries, and it recently changed signs. It's in the sign of Taurus, and that has its own kind of unique significance, which we can get into. But sure. if you look at Aries is the individual. It represents the self, and it tends to be fairly warrior-like and martial. And it is male energy. And what we saw during Uranus and Aries was sort of the rise of the militant self, meaning that all these different groups and people within the groups, these various groups, had this kind of Uranian revolutionary awakening. In the kind of the social justice world, people were claiming that they were woke. Right, they got woke, right. And on the other side of the fence, people in the kind of the right territory, they had their PC manacles ripped off of them. Donald Trump played a large role with that, and so therefore they were starting to wake up. And right now we're seeing again sort of this, it's like this cosmic tidal wave. And I don't know if you have been following the stuff around like the mass extinction riots or the mass extinction rebellion.
Yeah, I've heard about
protests. Yeah, so that's kind of a manifestation of Uranus and Taurus, which we can talk about. But one of the things that's really interesting is that there are people who were. This is a scene in London, and these guys who were part of the mass extinction rebellion. They're all part of the whole kind of climate change program, matrix agenda. And these guys were jumping on top of a subway train in working class England, and this was during the week. And if you think about it, their protest made absolutely no sense because theoretically, subways keep people out of cars, and they're protesting carbon, right? So what are they doing on top? I mean, what are they doing on top of subways? Well, and the area that they protested in was, again, this working class area of England, and these people had had enough. And so they jumped up on the train, they pulled these guys down from the train, and they beat the holy hell out of them. And we're starting to see some of this now, because what happened during that Uranus and Aries period is that people got accelerated, they got activated, and there's still a lot of kind of ambient aggression floating around. And again, you can see this on in many, many different areas of the so-called social landscape. So part of that period of time, it's not like, well, Uranus and Aries happened and it's over now. We're still dealing with the effects of that. We're still dealing with people that have been activated across the board, across the spectrum. And that's just one example of people, acting out of a sense of frustration or a sense of, we're mad as hell, we're not going to take it anymore. We're going to see more of that. Now, we can jump into Uranus and Taurus, which is where Uranus is now. And for your listeners out there, Uranus goes through 7-year cycles. And previously, again, we had Uranus in Aries, which was in Aries from 2011 to 2018 and part of 2019. Now we have Uranus in Taurus for another 7-year cycle. Oh. And while Aries is masculine, Taurus is feminine. And when we look at Uranus and Aries, we kind of dealt with kind of the rise in some ways of the radical masculine. Like Trump would be sort of a manifestation of that. Like he's this kind of radical masculine guy. We have not had a presence like Trump in the White House. So right. so Trump has been part of this Uranus and Aries, kind of this radical president, right? I mean, he's using Twitter, which is a Uranian, Aquarian kind of medium. And there's nobody ever like Trump. I mean, he says bullshit in his tweets. This is bullshit. I mean, we're seeing something we've never seen before. Now, again, put this into context with Uranus and Taurus, which is feminine, and we're starting to see this emergence of the radical feminine. Right. And there are people like, obviously, Elizabeth Warren would kind of come to mind, sort of being a radical feminine.
Kamala Harris,
but also Tulsi Gabbard.
Yep. And
Tulsi Gabbard, who happens to be in Aries, is now taking on this role, and I believe that she's being handled a bit. That's my sense. But she's taking on this role now of being the radical feminine. She's playing kind of a Trumpian-like role, calling out Hillary Clinton. She took down Kamala Harris. So we're seeing variations, and even somebody like Greta Thunberg, right? She's this radical young, female who's basically telling us that we've got 12 years left, and if we don't basically shut everything off like California, we're all going to die. So this is another version of this kind of radical, or there's a lot of radical energy in the air right now, in the cosmos, and Uranus is in a retrograde cycle. So it's already unstable in the sign of Taurus, and in a retrograde cycle, it becomes even more unstable. Like you can see people, again, like watching various groups just saying, we're sick of this, we're tired of this. So there would be kind of a reversion to a different kind of way of life or a different kind of connection to how they want to live in the present. They may be looking back at other times, the 1950s, 1940s, the 1600s, right? This is what retrogrades bring us. And today, astrologically, as you and I are speaking, we have a Sun-Uranus conjunction going on, and the moon is in the sign of Scorpio, so we're almost at new moon phase. By the time we get into 9 p.m. Central Time, we will be in the new moon of Scorpio, and we will have that moon or Uranus opposition. And that's, again, a very unstable energy. And I would not be surprised if you took the temperature of a number of people tonight and tomorrow, that the anxiety level would be much higher than it normally would be, because this is a very kind of catalytic, dealing with fixed signs. Taurus and Scorpio are fixed signs, the moon representing our emotions. So this is kind of an anything goes period. And I would say the next 24 hours could be really explosive, both from an emotional standpoint, but also kind of what's going on in the world. And, we don't have to look very far. California is literally on fire. I mean, this is crazy.
It is.
And again, if we want to look at Uranus retrograde, what are they doing? They're turning the power out. I mean, they're turning the power out. I've got a mother who lives in Northern California. They're saying that her power in Walnut Creek could be out for 5 days. So what is that? That's like going back to like the 1700s or the 1800s, before electricity even existed, right? That's a Uranian retrograde moment in time. So the next 48 hours, I think, are a bit sketchy, to be honest with you.
Wow.
And then on the 1st, we've got Mercury getting ready to go retrograde. And that's going to be a very, very interesting time when Mercury goes retrograde. The other aspect that I've been talking about on my show and a couple other shows that people have had me on, and I've been sort of dialoguing with, is that Mars is in the sign of Libra. Mars, again, that's the ruler of Aries, but it's in the opposite sign. So Libra is ruled by Venus. So we have this kind of unusual sort of it's almost, what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost passive aggressive. Mars and Libra can be very passive aggressive, but from the place of social justice or in those kinds of issues, Mars and Libra is right at home. That said, we've got a Mars-Pluto square coming up later in the week. And I've been tracking this square now for about 2 months. Wow. And this is very explosive from a perspective of violence, sort of, kind of open-ended combat. This is really high conflagration energy, and it reaches its peak by the end of the week. And right now, we even have a Mars-Saturn square, and we're headed into Monday. And Monday is always a very interesting day. I mean, Monday is known as Moon Day or Lunas, right? So whenever we go into Monday, we're getting into kind of a lunar cycle with the week ahead. And people are kind of moving more with their emotional bodies as they transition from the weekend into the weekday. It's not like kind of a solar, Sunday is the Sunday. So we're going from the sun to the moon. So we're moving into kind of a lunar relationship with every single week. I mean, that's just how it works. And so our emotional bodies are much more open on Mondays than normal. It takes us a while to get kind of cranked up and get going again. And theoretically, our energies peak on Sunday or Sol Day. So as we move into Monday, the emotional body with the moon in Scorpio, and we've got that Mars-Saturn square that's happening right now, and that's pushing hard against hierarchies, hard against corporations, hard against governments, hard against bosses. So the beginning of this week starts off in a pretty intense tempo, and with, I believe, kind of an elevated level of either acknowledged or unacknowledged anxiety, and that's kind of where we are.
Wow, that's a lot.
But there is some other positive stuff that I do want to talk about. I don't know if you need to go to a break, and I'd like to build that in before people go for their medicine cabinets and reach for an excess of barbiturates.
Yeah, let's jump into the positive stuff that's going on.
The positive stuff is the truth cannot be contained any longer. Jupiter is in Sagittarius and is finally broken free of the yoke that it's been in with the square to Neptune. So we've been going through this Jupiter-Neptune square for most part of the spring and all the summer and part of the fall. And I may have explained this before, but if I haven't, Jupiter and Sagittarius is this expansion of truth. Like Sagittarius is invested in truth and authenticity and kind of a higher order of being. And Neptune and Pisces is really invested in that. It's more about feeling and nuance, and sometimes Neptune and Pisces can be kind of messianic, or sometimes it can be really invested in victimization. It's got that kind of really wide spectrum, from the Messiah to the cross. That's what we're talking about with Neptune and Pisces. And Jupiter, which has been saying, "Hey, come on, we want to open things up. We want to get to the bottom of the FISA investigations. We want to get to the bottom of what happened prior to Trump getting in office, and all of these agreements were made and put into place to essentially spy on the Trump family, Trump Foundation." What did we have? We had almost 2 years of Russiagate, and that was during the majority of it was this Jupiter square to Neptune. Did we get? Where did it go and what happened? There was no truth there whatsoever. Now Jupiter's starting to break free, and we're starting to see some of the effects of that. So whatever has been hidden, or whatever it has been sort of clouded and occluded, is now going to come to light. In some ways, it's not even like some of it will be unexpected. Like this gal in California, this Katie Hill, who's this congresswoman from California, and they got her doing naked bong hits, right? This is what we're talking about. All of a sudden, wow, look at this. Where did this come from? That stuff is a byproduct of essentially a backlog of truth that has been kept in the undercurrent of this kind of Neptunian and Piscean wash. So now it's going to start to rise to the surface. And in some ways, it is indiscriminate, right? It is indiscriminate. It's not like, well, this was going on over here and it was being, it was being mediated, it was being subverted, it was being held down, and all of a sudden it's going to rise to the top. It doesn't always work that way. It could be something else from a completely different area, but it is going to come to the surface. So between now and the beginning of December, middle part of December, it's going to be a really interesting time because we're in those final degrees of Sagittarius, which puts it in the Leo decan, which means people are going to get really self-righteous about this, but it also gets really close to the galactic center. And as Jupiter moves closer to the galactic center, things get blown wide open. So hang on to your hats. That's the good stuff we get to look forward to if you're invested in that. If you like that kind of thing, if you're waiting for revelation in a kind of a political sense, or if you're waiting for it in terms of just truth and justice, I can tell you right now, the next 30 days are going to be something to witness and behold in your own life. You have your own opportunity to be able to open up to that. And if you've been working kind of assiduously on yourself, and doing the things that are really going to be supporting that inner quest for truth, being honest with yourself, honest with others, that's a really important kind of step right now. And if you've been doing that for the last year and getting to that point, then where Jupiter is headed, there's going to be a big payoff for folks. If you have not been honest with yourself, if you've been lying, if you've been hanging out or hiding out or in denial, this is going to be kind of a mad rush to clear all that so that you can get as present as you possibly can.
Wow. That's a lot. But, it's really proving out what you're saying about the truth can no longer be hidden. It's coming out so fast and from so many different directions. I'm sure that all these, particularly the politicians that we're seeing, out front and on stage in front of us, all of their stuff is being revealed. All of these pay-for-play deals that they made, all of the corruption that's been going on for decades and decades, it's all coming out, and there's no stopping it. And that's really exciting to me, because that's the beginning, in my mind, that's the beginning of justice. You know, we may not see justice for a long time, but this is the first step to actually, you know, letting people know the truth of what's been going on, because it's been hidden for so long.
Yeah, you know, you're absolutely right. And what's really interesting is to see it in sort of these various parts of sort of the astrological zone. And looking at, like, you know, what's going on with Joe Biden and what's happening with Joe Biden and his son in Ukraine. You know, Ukraine is it's a foreign country. It's a foreign government. And Jupiter and Sagittarius rules foreign countries and foreign governments. So we're seeing a lot of this now in relationship to this, you know, all these various politicians. Anyway, so you're right. I mean, and again, I was just trying to contextualize this with Jupiter, Sagittarius, and foreign countries. That stuff's coming out. And even in the stuff with, like, Daryl Morey, and when he just had that really semi-innocuous, innocent tweet, hey, you know, I stand with Hong Kong and freedom. Well, that tweet created a firestorm.
Yeah, and it was a pretty nice tweet, I thought. I
thought it was great. And guess what happens? We have LeBron James coming out and essentially saying, you don't know what you're talking about, you're uninformed. And LeBron James, within 40 words or whatever that Twitter has now, or 280 words, within that one tweet, LeBron James did more to absolutely demolish his reputation than anything he's ever done since the announcement. And again, the truth comes out, right? We get to see the truth.
Oh, yeah, it's all about the money.
About the money. It's all about Nike. It's all about the NBA's collusion. And this is where we are right now. It's a fascinating time to be alive.
It really is. And I'm excited to see that. And these people are outing themselves, like LeBron James. And, you know, it's a sad thing to see that, you know, sports celebrities and famous actors and actresses, you know, they come out, and these people are not somebody we need to be paying attention to, but they seem to get a lot of attention, and they really don't know anything about what they're talking about. Most of them, they only know their own self-interest, and that's certainly the case with LeBron James. You know, it's all about, well, gee, I don't want to mess up the money train. We're all making a lot of money here with China, so we certainly don't want to say anything, you know, against how they have a million Muslims in concentration camps and rehabilitation camps, that kind of thing. We don't want to talk about human rights. We just want to say nice things so we can keep that money train going.
Yeah, I think there are two words that LeBron James probably has never heard of together, and that's organ harvesting.
Yeah.
And if he knew what went on with dissidents in China, he'd probably be singing a very different tune.
Yeah. And, well, you got to wonder, though, maybe he does know some of that, but he's just, money's more important. And that's a sad thing. And it's too bad that people like that are getting a lot of press, because they certainly don't deserve it. All right, we're coming up on the break once again. We're with our guest, Robert Phoenix. We've got a lot more interesting stuff to talk about in just a few minutes here, so we'll be right back. All right, welcome back once again, everybody. We're with Robert Phoenix, and we're having a super interesting conversation about the astrological energies that are just going wacko around us all the time. But the good thing is that a lot of good stuff's coming out. A lot of truth is making its way to the surface, and we're getting to see it. So much that's been hidden from us for such a long time. This is a great thing. It definitely creates a lot of chaos, and for some people that's very unsettling. But we need to look at what's going on. We can't change anything if we don't know what's wrong. So we definitely need to look at what's really going on, and it's all being revealed. So that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a time of revelation, and that's where we are.
So Robert, tell us, please, What are Trump's astro energies? I mean, what are we seeing with him? Because there is a full out assault to get him out of office, to just do anything possible to, disrupt what he's doing. So in my book, I'm going, hey, I don't agree with him in a lot of things, but there are certainly some good things that he's doing and going in the right direction on. And this is just making the dark side go crazy. The cabal is just pulling out all the stops on him. So what are his energies now? What has he got going for him or going against him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. So Trump is a really interesting character astrologically. And I'll go into his chart, but I was looking at this one aspect before we got on the show tonight, and it had kind of eluded my my focus and perception because I was looking at other areas of his chart, which will happen every now and then. And I looked at the fact that he has what's called fixed star algol right on his midheaven. Now, the midheaven is kind of this point of contact with the world. It represents sort of our destiny, our fame, how we interact with kind of the grand circus of life. And he has his midheaven at 24 Taurus. And of course, people that have Taurus on the midheaven are generally invested in things like money and power and structures and building. And Trump is a builder. So it would make sense that he would have this building aspect at the highest part of his chart, right? That would be very much akin to Trump Tower and any other skyscraper or extremely large building that he'd be invested in. It's in his chart. But there's this fixed star algol, which is also known as the star of Medusa's head. And it is in the constellation of Taurus, and it's right on his midheaven. And it is a fixed star that's known for decapitation, right? Because that's what happened with Medusa and Medusa's head, right? She got decapitated, but then they were able to use Medusa's head as a talisman for protection, which is kind of an interesting sort of twist on this fixed star. So it's really interesting. If you go back and you look at that tweet that got Kathy Griffin in trouble, she was holding his decapitated head, right?
Yep.
That is right in his chart. That is right at his midheaven. And I have this theory that in a previous lifetime, and I'm going to go all the way back to the Jacobin Revolution, that Trump might have even played the role of Robespierre during that time, meaning that he was responsible for the beheading of hundreds of thousands of people.
Wow, that's interesting.
But it's a theory, and I'm just throwing it out there because it is a very prominent placement. So now I believe what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to reenact his own version of the Jacobin Revolution by going after the so-called deep state. And if you look at that revolution, I mean, theoretically, that was what was going on there, and it was a populist movement, right? The people got behind Robespierre, and Robespierre was an agent of the Rothschild family. So they got behind him, and it's like, okay, well, let's take down the elites. Let's take down all these rich people who have made our lives worse by their collective gain and our individual loss. Well, they were led down the primrose path, and of course, what was happening is that the Rothschilds were essentially decapitating all their rivals, right? But the people were for it, and that was sort of the gist of the French Revolution. Yep. So there's some of this energy with Trump, and there are a lot of people that would like to cut his head off, and he's got this fixed star algol right at the top of his chart. It goes all the way back to the Kathy Griffin tweet, right, with holding his head. So he's somebody that I believe is reanimating that revolution, but it looks different. It's still a populist movement, and you can replace the elites with the deep state. And there's something interesting going on time-wise. The other thing is that he's really connected to JFK. And I've got this theory about Trump and JFK, and that there was this whole timeline pre-JFK that the United States and the world was headed down. And JFK was on the precipice of doing some very interesting and some very radical things, one of which was he was going after the intelligence agencies.
Yes, he was.
And what is Trump going to doing now? He's going after the intelligence agencies, right? It's kind of the same thing. JFK, a lot of people may not know this, but he also was invested in returning the United States to a silver standard and getting out of the Federal Reserve. And how he was doing this is he was working with the Hunt brothers in Texas, along with John Connally, who at that time was, I believe, the governor of Texas.
Yes, he was.
And Texas has a renewable treaty with the United States, and and basically every year it's kind of a rubber stamp deal. It's the only state in the United States that can do this. So Kennedy was looking to relocate sort of the central bank of the United States, if you will, in Texas. And what he had done is he had gotten the United States, he'd taken silver out of the circulation. Like if you go back and look at what happened right after Kennedy makes this announcement, it was an executive order actually, a silver dollar was no longer a silver dollar, right? And silver dollar began to gain more in value because we were moving away from that, and all the quarters and all the dimes that were silver now had copper centers. And the Hunt brothers were trying to corner the silver market. And so there was this interesting kind of schemata in place to get out of the Federal Reserve, to relocate the federal bank in Texas using silver, which was now at a higher value because it had been taken out of circulation as a coin. So what is Trump like talking about now? He's talking about going to a gold standard. And who has he been going after? He's been going after Jerome Powell from the Federal Reserve. So there are these really interesting parallels. Kennedy, what was Kennedy theoretically going to do? He was theoretically going to get us out of the Vietnam War. There was talk about that. What is Trump trying to do? Trump theoretically is trying to get us out of the Middle East, even though he's still playing the corporate game. He still has troops in Syria that's guarding a refinery. He's doing that for Israel, by the way. That's in the area that's been taken over by Israel and Genie Petroleum, I believe.
Golan Heights.
That's right. They have their claws in that actual facility, and that's why he's there. But again, there's this reanimation along this Kennedy timeline, doing the same things. And then things get really interesting. So Kennedy, he dies on 11/22/63. He's killed in Dallas. Kennedy happens to be a Gemini, right? So we move forward in time and we go to 9/11, which I think is very much linked to the Kennedy assassination. And we have George H.W. Bush, who's in Dallas. He's the CIA operative, field operative in Dallas, theoretically engaged in operations there. So the sign of Gemini is very, very prominent. Kennedy is a Gemini. George H.W. Bush is a Gemini. Of course, Trump is a Gemini. And then we move forward to 9/11, 2000, and what do we have? 2001, rather. And what do we have? We have the Twin Towers, which are symbolic of Gemini. The moon was in Gemini when the Twin Towers came down. Saturn was in Gemini when the Twin Towers came down. Who was president? It was another George. So there are two Georges, two Bushes, the father and the son, mirroring each other. Again, Gemini. The mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, is a Gemini. And Larry Silverstein, who owned the World Trade Center at the time, also a Gemini. And when we talk about Gemini, we talk about these parallel tracks and parallel timelines. And there's even this really weird picture of Rudy Giuliani, who's dressed up as Marilyn Monroe. And Trump is feeling him up and kissing him. And so, again, there's this strange kind of, thing with Giuliani playing the role of Marilyn Monroe, who's also a Gemini. So there's this really unusual series of synchronicities with 9/11 and Dallas and Kennedy. And even if you look in the center of Dallas, what do you have? You've got the two L's, right, which are reminiscent of the Twin Towers. And then Trump just went back to Dealey Plaza, what was it, two weeks ago to give a
Yep.
speech.
He did.
So for me, that was symbolic of Trump getting through that kind of piece of history and resetting something. So he's really interesting in this way. And he's got this Sun Uranus conjunction, of course, in Gemini. And then he also has, he was born on a lunar eclipse, and the moon is in Sagittarius. So he has Jupiter getting really, really close to his moon right now. And there's something about Trump and this boomerang effect where somebody will, they call it the Trump curse, where something or somebody will go after Trump or they'll say something, and there may not even be any direct correlation. And all of a sudden, bang, they're hit, something happens. It's really weird. It's borderline supernatural. And I think it has something to do with this interesting eclipse energy with his moon in Sagittarius and this kind of cyclotron effect with the sun. And what's interesting about charts is that most people look at them and they'll say, well, this is just a kind of a two-dimensional representation. This is not a two-dimensional representation. We're talking about space, and we're talking about angles and orbits and declinations. If you looked at it in a round ball, it would look very, very different. And so in opposition, if you look at it from a third-dimensional perspective, isn't just an opposition, it is a loop. It's like a feedback loop. And I think this is in part due to what happens when somebody goes after Trump, and the next thing you know, they're having some kind of karmic payback in some ways. So in terms of what's happening with him now, he's had the true node, which is the ascending plane of the moon, going through his 11th house, which is groups and organizations and people. And he's got a Venus-Saturn conjunction in the sign of Cancer. And he also has Mercury in Cancer, and Cancer is a very populist sign. It represents the people, growing things, families. The United States is a Cancerian country. And so he's actually been rising in power with the true node going through his 11th house. And again, getting back to this kind of this loop that he has in this chart, that as the Democrats go further and deeper with this impeachment process, he is going to get stronger and he's going to garner more support. And you're even seeing some Republicans now finally standing up for the guy, because in the beginning he was on an island. And he's going through a very interesting time. And if we can get to the election, and I have some doubts, I think we'll probably get there. We've got a long way to go, some very intense eclipse energies coming up. But when we get to that point in time, the true node will be in his 10th house and he will be unbeatable. I seriously doubt that he would lose this next election. And it doesn't matter who the left or who the Democrats run. Doesn't matter if it's Hillary Clinton. They could run 3 candidates and he's probably going to win. And that's what's going on with him right now. He also has Mars in his chart and the sign of Leo right on his ascendant. And that's a 29 Leo. So he's a Leo rising. And he has fixed star Regulus right on his ascendant. So if you were an astrologer, say back in, excuse me, the 1800s, and you were an astrologer for a royal family or one of the bloodline families, you'd look at Trump's chart and you would say that this is a chart of destiny, and that they would separate him out as somebody that they would want to cultivate because of where Regulus was on his ascendant. So he's living his destiny, and he is somebody, he's not perfect, and he'll do things that are incredibly underhanded. He'll do things that are shifty. He will not play by the rules. He's a disruptor. I would not trust him. If you were even his closest business associate, we've seen this before, he'll throw somebody under the bus and he won't think twice about it, right? But that's part of his game and part of his strategy, and it keeps people off guard. He's a non-political entity in a political world and essentially breaking all the rules as he goes. So this is one of the most fascinating, interesting characters I think we've ever seen as a president, and maybe even just in terms of the public stage. And this thing isn't over yet. So hold on to your hats.
I know, it's absolutely nuts. It's you know, a lot of, I think, what goes on in the political world is contrived in, there's a lot of extra drama created for effect and that kind of thing. But still, these things affect all of us, even though these politicians are basically just front people for the most part. And I don't think Trump, I still haven't figured out, he obviously is not of the same ilk as the typical politician because that's never been his thing. So it still remains to be seen where his true core is as far as, what he's actually trying to do. I like a lot of what he's trying to do. I like the idea that he's trying to get us out of these endless wars, which sounds great. But I don't like the idea that he supports Israel unconditionally, no matter what they do, because they certainly do a lot of pretty bad things, especially with the Palestinians. And so that's kind of disturbing in my book. But the fact that he is talking about, restoring, power to the people and getting back to a constitutional type situation, that's wonderful. And that's never occurred before that I can recall with any recent, presidents going back to Kennedy.
There you go. Going back to Kennedy, right? The pre-Kennedy timeline. Yeah, which is exactly what we're talking about. The Israel thing is interesting. If you look at Trump, he's surrounded himself with some of the most powerful Jewish business people, politicians, and media people on the planet. This is not by mistake. He knew that in order to get elected, he would have to have some of the most powerful people on the planet. And from that group, from that community, from that religion on his side. So we're talking about people like Paul Singer and Sheldon Adelson. Yep. And Sheldon Adelson made it very clear early on that Trump needed to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And Trump,
I never understood that. What is the significance of that? I really don't understand. I never really understood that.
Because the Jerusalem, there was kind of this pact at one point in time that Jerusalem would be a place where the Christians, where the Muslims, and where the Jews could all cohabitate. And when you look at the spiritual center of Jerusalem happens to be the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which theoretically was built upon the Temple of Solomon. So for the United States to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and that's where the embassy would be built, that would begin the rebuilding of Solomon's temple. And whether it was going to be on the grounds of the Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Rock of the Dome itself, or it would be in a building that would be within the vicinity of that would be the resurrection of the temple. And that's why it's important. And the resurrection of the temple falls into their prophecy. And the prophecy is that they have to rebuild the temple, and then the Mosaic, or the Messiah, will be reborn, or would reappear. And so Trump theoretically would be the builder, and he is a builder, right? That's what he does. He builds hotels and skyscrapers. So that's the significance. Now, if you watch Trump, he got that stuff out of the way early. He did not go to war with Iran. He hasn't gone to war with Iran yet, and Israel desperately wants to go to war with Iran. Yep. And he's pushed back on that. And in fact, he fired the most war-hungry neocon in his cabinet, which was John Bolton.
Yeah.
Right. So Trump is interesting in this way. I mean, he will turn if he has to. And it's kind of like, I like to use the analogy of the TV show Survivor. Trump is a survivor, and he will change allegiances to tribes. He'll change allegiances to parties if he needs to. He was a Democrat originally. Now he's a Republican. This is who the guy is. But he's always got kind of, I think, one end goal in mind, and some of which I think he's cognizant of, and some of which I think he's figuring out as it goes along.
Yeah, I really hope that there's some sincerity in the whole idea of returning power to people and that whole concept of, it's great to talk about that, but it would be even better to see more of that in action. But then again, you look at it, literally almost everybody in the political world and the government is working against him. So it's amazing he could do anything.
Right, exactly. So you have to ask yourself, is all the animus scripted?
Yeah.
And if it's all scripted, then we live in a world that's far worse than
we thought.
Than we could ever imagine. And I think some of it is some is scripted, and I think some of it's actually very real.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so fascinating, because we know politics has always been theater, but this is a different kind of animal that's going on now. We've never seen this before. It's like all the stops are being pulled out. We've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, no, this is great theater on some level. If you can detach yourself from TDS, the Trump derangement syndrome, you'll find this thing to be absolutely fascinating and riveting to watch.
It is. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen. And I'm really hopeful that this is going to go in a really good direction for we the people, because, after all, we are supposed to be the caretakers of our republic. And we've kind of fallen asleep on the job here and allowed these miscreants, the bankers, and a lot of these other idiots to take over. So now that all of it's coming out, we need to take steps to preserve that. So, man, this has just flown by, Robert. Thank you so much for being with us once again. We got to have you back a little quicker, I think, next time to get caught up on what's going on. But you've been listening to Inside the Matrix, and that's going to wrap it up for us today. So everybody have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
This is Inside the Matrix, hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Jimmy Brent. Jimmy Brent. Live every Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It is worldwide.
Broadcasting from an undisclosed location deep within the neon capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. For more information on the host and the show, please visit InsideTheMatrix.org. That's InsideTheMatrix.org. It's time to break the chains of manipulated consciousness and claim our true nature as creative divine beings. Inside the Matrix. Inside the Matrix.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.